Richard Thornton drove home with a pounding headache. The traffic wasn't helping. Horns blared as he cut across 2 lanes to make his exit. He was already running late, and his day had been nothing short of awful. His boss had torn apart his quarterly report in front of the entire department. The coffee machine had broken down when he desperately needed caffeine. And to top it all off, his ex-wife had called to remind him that his alimony payment was due tomorrow. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Just get home, grab the files, and head back out, he muttered to himself. 20 minutes tops. Richard pulled into the driveway of his 2-story suburban house. It was too big for just him, but he'd refused to sell it after the divorce. The house was the one thing he'd fought for, a symbol that he hadn't completely failed at life. He slammed his car door and marched up the front path, loosening his tie. The October evening was cooler than expected, and dark clouds threatened rain. As he fumbled with his house keys, his phone buzzed. A text from Thomas, his boss. "Don't forget those projections for tomorrow's meeting." "I need them tonight," Richard rolled his eyes. "As if I could forget after you humiliated me today," he grumbled, pushing open the front door. The house smelled of lemon furniture polish and something cooking in the slow cooker. Maria must have been there today. Richard employed Maria Delgado as his housekeeper 3 days a week. She kept the place in order, prepared simple meals he could reheat, and generally made his bachelor existence more manageable. She was quiet, efficient, and stayed out of his way. Exactly what he wanted in household help. Richard tossed his coat over the back of the couch and headed straight for the small table in the entryway, where he always left his car keys. He needed to grab the files from his home office and get to the dinner meeting with potential investors. Thomas was counting on him to charm these people, despite having belittled his work earlier. But the keys weren't there. Richard frowned, patting his pockets even though he knew they'd be empty. He always put his car keys on that table. It was a habit formed over years. Walk in, keys on table. Simple, yet the polished wood surface was bare except for a stack of mail and a small decorative bowl. "You've got to be kidding me," Richard muttered, turning in a circle. He checked his pants pockets again, then his jacket. Nothing. He peered under the table behind the mail in the bowl. No keys. His headache intensified as he moved into the living room, scanning the coffee table and couch cushions. The clock on the wall showed 6:35 p.m. His meeting was at 7:30 across town. "Think, Richard," he told himself. "You drove home, so you had them 5 minutes ago." He backtracked to the front door, checking the lock, the doormat, even the flower pot beside the entrance. Nothing. Frustration bubbled up inside him like a pot about to boil over. Richard stormed into the kitchen, yanking open drawers and slamming them shut when they didn't reveal his keys. His movements became more frantic as the minutes ticked by. The investors wouldn't wait, and Thomas would have yet another reason to belittle him. The sound of the front door opening made Richard spin around. "Hello? Mr. Thornton?" Maria's voice called from the entryway. Richard marched back toward the front of the house. Maria stood just inside the door, a canvas grocery bag in one hand. Beside her was a young girl, her daughter, whom Richard had seen once or twice before when Maria had to bring her along. "Maria, thank goodness." "Have you seen my car keys?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice level despite his rising panic. Maria shook her head. "No, sir. I cleaned today, but I don't touch your personal things." "Well, someone moved them because they're not where I left them," Richard said, his tone sharper than intended. "I always put them on this table, and now they're gone." The girl, Sophia, Richard vaguely remembered her name was, shifted uncomfortably beside her mother. She looked about 12 with the same dark eyes as Maria, but taller. Gangly in that awkward preteen way. She wore her school uniform and clutched a backpack with cartoon characters Richard didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thornton. Maybe they fell somewhere?" Maria suggested, setting down her bag. "I can help you look. I've already looked everywhere," Richard snapped. "They didn't just disappear into thin air." Sophia's eyes widened at his tone, and she took a small step back. Maria placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We'll help you find them," Maria said calmly. "Sophia, put your backpack down and let's help Mr. Thornton." The girl nodded, slipping her backpack off and placing it carefully beside the door. As she bent down, Richard noticed something, a flicker of recognition in her eyes quickly hidden. You know something, he said, pointing at Sophia. Did you see my keys? Sophia glanced at her mother, then back at Richard. I might have moved them, sir, she admitted in a small voice. Richard's temper, held together by the thinnest thread all day, finally snapped. You what? You touched my things? Why would you do that? Sophia took another step back, bumping into the wall. I was just trying to help. When I was here after school, I was dusting for Mom, and I don't care what you were doing. Richard's voice rose with each word. You don't touch other people's belongings. Do you have any idea how important tonight is? I'm already late for a critical meeting, and now I can't even leave because you decided to move my keys. Maria stepped between them. Mr. Thornton, please. She was only trying to help. Sophia, where did you put the keys? Sophia's lower lip trembled. In the kitchen drawer. The one with the notepads. I thought it would be safer there than just out on the table. Richard's face flushed with anger. Safer? Safer? They were perfectly safe where I left them. That's where they always go, so I can find them easily. Now I've wasted 15 minutes searching for something that shouldn't have been moved in the first place. He pushed past Maria and stormed into the kitchen, yanking open the drawer Sophia had mentioned. There, nestled among pens and notepads, were his car keys. Richard snatched them up, whirling back toward the entryway where Maria stood with her arm around Sophia's shoulders. The girl looked on the verge of tears. This is completely unacceptable. Richard continued, marching back toward them, keys clutched tightly in his hand. I hired your mother to clean my house, not to let her child rearrange my personal belongings. I'm sorry, Sophia whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. I just thought, you didn't think. Richard towered over her, his face reddened with rage. That's the problem. I have a system in this house. Everything has its place for a reason. Maria's expression hardened. Mr. Thornton, that's enough. She made a mistake. She's a child. A child should know better than to touch things that don't belong to her, Richard retorted, jabbing a finger in Sophia's direction. How would she like it if I went into her room and moved all her things around? How would she find anything? Sophia was fully crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she pressed herself against the wall. Maria moved more firmly in front of her daughter. We're leaving, Maria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Sophia, get your backpack. No, you're not leaving yet, Richard said, blocking their path to the door. Not until she understands what she did wrong. Do you realize I could lose my job if I miss this meeting? Do you understand what that means? No more house to clean, no more paycheck for your mother. A small noise from the doorway made them all turn. Mrs. Patel, Richard's elderly neighbor, stood at the open door, her hand still raised to knock. I heard shouting, she said, her Indian accent thickening with concern. Is everything all right? Richard opened his mouth to tell her to mind her own business when a strange sensation gripped his chest. It started as pressure, like someone sitting on him, then quickly transformed into a crushing pain that radiated down his left arm. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Richard tried to take a breath, but his lungs refused to cooperate. The keys slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor as he clutched at his shirt front. Mr. Thornton? Maria's voice sounded distant, though she stood just feet away. Richard tried to speak, to explain the terrible pain squeezing his heart, but no words came. His vision blurred at the edges as he gasped for air. 10 seconds ago he'd been yelling, full of righteous anger over misplaced keys. Now, as the crushing weight in his chest intensified, those keys seemed utterly meaningless. Richard's last conscious thought, as the room spun and the floor rushed up to meet him, was how absurd it all was, that the final moments of his life would be spent in fury over such a small thing. And then, no one in the room was breathing, Richard because he couldn't, and everyone else because they were too shocked to remember how. Time seemed to stop as Richard's body hit the floor with a heavy thud. For a moment nobody moved. The sound of his fall echoed in the entryway, followed by a terrible silence. Sophia pressed her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Maria was the first to break free from the shock. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Richard's crumpled form. Mr. Thornton, can you hear me? She called, gently shaking his shoulder. Richard lay motionless, his face ashen gray, a thin line of spittle forming at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Mrs. Patel pushed past Sophia and joined Maria on the floor. Despite her 70 years and arthritic knees, the old woman moved with surprising speed. "Heart attack," she said with the certainty of someone who knew what they were looking at. "I was a nurse for 40 years. Turn him on his back, quickly." Together they rolled Richard onto his back. Mrs. Patel pressed her ear to his chest, then placed 2 fingers against his neck. "His pulse is weak and irregular," she announced, her voice shifting into the calm, authoritative tone of a medical professional. "We need an ambulance now." Maria fumbled for her phone, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't unlock the screen. "Sophia," she called to her daughter, who remained frozen against the wall. "Sophia, call 911. The sound of her mother's voice snapped Sophia out of her trance. She stumbled forward, taking the phone with trembling hands. Her fingers slipped twice before she managed to dial the emergency number. "1, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice sounded tinny through the phone's speaker. "We need an ambulance," Sophia said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. I think a man is having a heart attack." "What's the address, sweetie?" Sophia looked to her mother in panic. She didn't know Richard's address. "Oakwood Drive," Mrs. Patel said loudly enough for the operator to hear. "Tell them it's a suspected cardiac arrest in a middle-aged male. No breathing, weak pulse." As Sophia relayed the information, Mrs. Patel began chest compressions. Her small, wrinkled hands pressed firmly against Richard's sternum in a steady rhythm. "Maria, do you know how to do CPR?" Mrs. Patel asked between counts. Maria shook her head. "No, I never learned." "Then I'll keep going. Watch what I do, 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. If I get tired, you'll need to take over." Mrs. Patel continued the chest compressions while giving instructions. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Good, that's it. We need to keep his blood circulating until the ambulance arrives." After 30 compressions, she tilted Richard's head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose slightly with each breath, then fell. Sophia stood nearby, still on the phone with the 911 operator. "They want to know if he's breathing on his own," she said, her voice shaking. Mrs. Patel shook her head. "No spontaneous breathing. Tell them I've started CPR." As Sophia relayed this information, Maria noticed Richard's lips taking on a bluish tinge. His skin was clammy and cold to the touch. "Is he going to die?" Sophia whispered, covering the phone with her hand so the operator wouldn't hear. Before anyone could answer, the sound of sirens cut through the evening air. They grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside the house. "They're here," Maria said, rushing to open the front door wider. 2 paramedics jogged up the front path carrying a large medical kit and a defibrillator. A third followed with a stretcher. "In here," Maria called, waving them inside. "He collapsed about 5 minutes ago." The first paramedic, a stocky man with a buzz cut, knelt beside Richard and Mrs. Patel. "Good job with the CPR, ma'am. We'll take it from here." Mrs. Patel moved aside, her breathing heavy from exertion. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, one continuing chest compressions while the other attached monitoring pads to Richard's chest. "No pulse." "V-fib," announced the second paramedic, a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Charging defibrillator." "Everyone stand clear." Maria pulled Sophia away from Richard, backing them both against the wall. Mrs. Patel joined them, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Clear," called the female paramedic. Richard's body jerked as the electric shock passed through him. All eyes went to the monitor, still in V-fib, continuing CPR. The first paramedic resumed chest compressions while his colleague prepared another shock. Sophia turned and buried her face against her mother's shoulder, unable to watch anymore. "Clear." Again, Richard's body convulsed, then went still. "We've got a rhythm," the paramedic announced. "It's weak, but it's there. Let's get him loaded and moving." They transferred Richard onto the stretcher with practiced movements, strapping him down securely. One paramedic placed an oxygen mask over his face while the other inserted an IV line into his arm. "Is anyone family?" the female paramedic asked, looking at the 3 stunned onlookers. Maria shook her head. "No, I'm his housekeeper. This is my daughter, and Mrs. Patel is his neighbor. Does he have family we should contact?" "His sister," Mrs. Patel said. "Claire Thornton. He has her photo on his fridge. I think her number might be on his emergency contact list in the kitchen drawer." The third paramedic nodded. "We'll need someone to look for that. In the meantime, we need to get him to the hospital immediately. He's in critical condition. Can I come with him?" Maria asked, surprising herself with the question. The paramedic hesitated. Are you sure? You're not family. I know, but… Maria looked down at Richard's pale face. Just minutes ago, he'd been shouting at her daughter. Now he looked small and vulnerable, fighting for his life. Someone should be with him. Mom? Sophia's voice was barely audible. Do you want me to go too? Maria studied her daughter's face, the tear-stained cheeks, the fear in her eyes. She couldn't put Sophia through more trauma. No, honey, Mrs. Patel, would you mind looking after Sophia while I go? I'll call as soon as I know anything. The elderly woman nodded, placing a comforting arm around Sophia's shoulders. Of course. We'll find the sister's number and call her. Ma'am, if you're coming, we need to leave now, the paramedic urged, already wheeling Richard toward the door. Go, Mrs. Patel said. We'll take care of things here. Maria followed the paramedics out to the ambulance. The neighbors had begun to gather on their front lawns, drawn by the flashing lights and sirens. She climbed into the back of the ambulance, taking a seat where she could see Richard but wouldn't be in the way. As the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, Maria caught a glimpse of Sophia standing in the doorway with Mrs. Patel. The girl looked so small, so frightened. Maria felt a pang of guilt for leaving her, but something told her she needed to be with Richard. The ride to the hospital was a blur of activity. The paramedics worked continuously, administering medications, checking vital signs, and occasionally performing more chest compressions when Richard's heartbeat became erratic. Is he going to make it? Maria asked during a moment of relative calm. The female paramedic glanced at her, her expression carefully neutral. We're doing everything we can. He's had a massive cardiac event. The next few hours will be critical. Maria nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. Richard might not survive the night. She thought back to the moment just before his collapse. His face red with anger, finger pointing accusingly at Sophia. The keys. Such a small thing to get so worked up about. Now those same keys lay forgotten on the floor of his entryway while he fought for his life. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. In a matter of seconds, Richard's entire world had shrunk down to the most basic struggle, the fight to take another breath. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance of Mercy General Hospital. The back doors flew open, and a team of hospital staff was waiting to receive them. Male, mid-40s, cardiac arrest in the field, reported the paramedic as they wheeled Richard out. We got him back after 2 shocks, but he's arrested twice more en route. Currently in sinus rhythm, but unstable. Maria followed behind as they rushed Richard through the automatic doors and into the bright lights of the emergency department. A doctor in blue scrubs joined them, jogging alongside the stretcher as the paramedics gave their report. Get him into Bay 1, the doctor ordered. I want a 12-lead EKG, cardiac enzymes, and call cardiology. We need an emergency cath lab ready. Maria tried to follow, but a nurse gently blocked her path. I'm sorry, you'll need to wait here. We have to work on him now. But Please, the nurse said, her voice kind but firm. Let us do our job. The best thing you can do is wait and perhaps fill out some paperwork if you know his information. Maria nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. Through the swinging doors, she caught one last glimpse of Richard, surrounded by a swarm of medical personnel. Before the doors closed, she sank into the chair, the events of the past hour crashing down on her all at once. Less than an hour ago, she'd been picking Sophia up from her after-school program, planning to drop by Mr. Thornton's house to leave some groceries she'd picked up for him. Now she sat in a hospital waiting room, praying for the life of a man who, just before collapsing, had been screaming at her daughter over a set of misplaced keys. Life could change so quickly. 1 minute you're breathing, yelling, alive with anger and purpose. The next minute you might not be breathing at all. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet for a place designed to hold people during their worst moments. Maria sat alone beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, staring at the clock on the wall. It had been 2 hours since they'd rushed Richard through those swinging doors, and still no word on his condition. She'd already filled out what paperwork she could, though her knowledge of Richard's medical history was limited to the bottles of blood pressure medication she sometimes found when cleaning his bathroom cabinet. The nurses seemed skeptical when she explained she wasn't family, just his housekeeper who happened to be there when he collapsed. Maria checked her phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. Mrs. Patel had texted that she'd found Claire's number and made the call. Richard's sister was on her way from Philadelphia, about a 3-hour drive. She'd also assured Maria that Sophia was doing okay. They'd made hot chocolate and were watching a movie to keep the girl's mind off what had happened. A new message appeared. Sophia wants to know if Mr. Thornton is going to be all right. Maria stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. The truth was she had no idea. Instead of answering, she tucked the phone back into her pocket and rested her head against the wall behind her. The events kept replaying in her mind. Richard's anger, his finger pointing in Sophia's face, the sudden change in his expression when the pain hit. The terrible thud as he hit the floor. The way his eyes had stared, empty and unseeing. Ms. Delgado? Maria looked up to find a doctor standing in front of her, still wearing blue scrubs covered partially by a white coat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and deep lines of fatigue marked her face. "Yes, that's me," Maria said, jumping to her feet. "How is he? How's Mr. Thornton?" The doctor gestured for Maria to sit back down, then took the seat beside her. "I'm Dr. Wells, the cardiologist who's been working on Mr. Thornton," she said. "He's alive, but his condition is extremely critical. He suffered a massive heart attack, what we call a widowmaker. It's a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, one of the most important vessels supplying blood to the heart." Maria nodded, trying to absorb this information. "But you fixed it, right? Cleared the blockage?" Dr. Wells sighed. "We performed an emergency procedure to restore blood flow, but I'm afraid there was significant damage to his heart muscle. He's currently in the cardiac intensive care unit on life support." "Life support?" Maria repeated, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "Yes. A ventilator is breathing for him right now. We've also put him in a medically induced coma to give his brain the best chance of recovery. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical." Maria's throat tightened. "So he might not make it." The doctor placed a gentle hand on Maria's arm. "I want to be honest with you, his chances are not good. His heart stopped multiple times, both at his home and in the ambulance. Even though CPR was performed quickly, his brain may have been deprived of oxygen for too long." Maria thought of the keys on the floor, of Sophia's frightened face, of Richard's last angry words. All of it seemed so trivial now, so meaningless in the face of life and death. "Can I see him?" she asked. Dr. Wells hesitated. "Normally we only allow immediate family in the ICU, but given the circumstances, yes, I think that would be all right. Just for a few minutes." "His sister is on the way, you said?" Maria nodded. "She should be here in an hour or so." "All right. I'll have a nurse take you up to see him, but please prepare yourself. He's hooked up to a lot of equipment and he won't be able to respond to you." As the doctor stood to leave, Maria caught her hand. "Thank you for everything you're doing for him." Dr. Wells gave her a tired smile. "It's my job. The nurse will be out in a moment to take you upstairs." Maria sent a quick text to Mrs. Patel, letting her know that Richard was alive but in critical condition. She deliberately kept it vague, not wanting to worry Sophia more than necessary. A few minutes later, a nurse named Ben appeared to escort her to the ICU. They rode the elevator in silence to the 4th floor, then walked down a long corridor. The ICU was a circular unit with a central nurses' station surrounded by glass-walled rooms. Each held a patient surrounded by beeping machines and hanging IV bags. "He's in room 4, Ben said, pointing to a door on the right. "You can have 10 minutes. The call button is by the bed if you need anything." Maria stepped into the room and nearly gasped. If not for the small name card on the door, she might not have recognized Richard at all. His face was swollen, his skin waxy and pale. A thick breathing tube protruded from his mouth, connected to a ventilator that made a rhythmic whooshing sound as it pushed air into his lungs. Wires ran from under his hospital gown to monitors that beeped and displayed numbers and waveforms Maria didn't understand. She approached the bed slowly, afraid that somehow her presence might disrupt the fragile balance keeping him alive. Richard's hands lay limp at his sides, an IV inserted into each one. Even unconscious, his face looked strained, as if he were fighting some internal battle. Maria carefully took a seat in the chair beside the bed. She wasn't sure what to do or say. They weren't friends. She worked for him, cleaned his house, occasionally cooked his meals. Their relationship had been purely professional, often with days passing without them exchanging more than a few words. Yet here she was, the only person with him during what might be his final hours. "Mr. Thornton," she said softly. "It's Maria. I don't know if you can hear me, but the doctors are doing everything they can for you." The machines continued their chorus of beeps and hums. Richard remained motionless except for the artificial rise and fall of his chest. "Your sister Claire is on her way. She'll be here soon, so you won't be alone." Maria fell silent, watching the steady line of his heartbeat on the monitor. Each peak represented another moment of life, another chance. "I want you to know that Sophia is okay. She was very brave. She called 911 and stayed calm. She's with Mrs. Patel now." Maria paused, then added, "She's worried about you." The door opened behind her, and a nurse entered to check Richard's vital signs and adjust one of his IV medications. She worked efficiently, barely acknowledging Maria's presence. "How is he doing?" Maria asked as the nurse recorded something on a chart. The nurse glanced at her, her expression carefully neutral. "No change. The doctor will be in to evaluate him again in about an hour." After the nurse left, Maria returned her attention to Richard. Looking at him now, pale and helpless, it was hard to reconcile this image with the angry man who had been shouting at her daughter just hours earlier. People were complex, she knew. Everyone had good days and bad days. Richard had always been polite to her, if somewhat distant. Today had clearly been a terrible day for him, culminating in a moment of anger that now seemed so insignificant. "I don't know what's going to happen," Maria continued softly. "But I hope you can fight this. I hope you get another chance." She thought about what she knew of Richard's life. Divorced, no children, working long hours at a job that seemed to cause him more stress than satisfaction. His house, though beautiful, had always felt impersonal, more like a showroom than a home. The few family photos he displayed were from years ago, showing happier times. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ben, the nurse who had escorted her up, poked his head in. "Ms. Delgado? There's a Claire Thornton in the waiting area. She's asking about her brother." Maria stood up, surprised. "She's here already? I thought she was still driving." "She said she left as soon as she got the call and drove as fast as she could. Would you like to meet her?" Maria nodded. She looked back at Richard one last time, taking in the machines keeping him alive, the stillness of his body. "Your sister is here now," she told him. "I'll let her come see you." As Maria followed Ben back to the waiting area, she felt oddly reluctant to leave. There was something about sitting with someone so close to the edge between life and death that created a strange intimacy, even between relative strangers. Claire Thornton looked nothing like her brother. Where Richard was tall and lean, she was petite with curly auburn hair cropped short around her face. Her eyes, though red-rimmed from crying, were the same shade of blue as Richard's. "You must be Maria," Claire said, rushing forward and grasping Maria's hands in her own. "Thank you for staying with him." "The nurse told me what happened. I just happened to be there," Maria said awkwardly. "My daughter and I had stopped by to drop off some groceries." Claire shook her head. "No, don't diminish what you did. Your neighbor started CPR. You called the ambulance. You came here with him. You didn't have to do any of that." Maria didn't know how to respond. It hadn't felt like a choice, just the natural thing to do when someone collapses in front of you. "How is he?" Claire asked, her voice catching. "They told me he's in critical condition, but what does that really mean? Is he going to be okay?" The hope in Claire's voice made Maria's chest tighten. She remembered the doctor's words. "His chances are not good." "The doctor can explain everything better than I can," Maria said gently. "But he had a severe heart attack. They've done a procedure to help, but he's on a ventilator right now." Claire closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Can I see him?" "Yes, of course. I was just with him. The nurse can take you up." Claire nodded, then surprised Maria by pulling her into a hug. "Thank you for being there when I couldn't be." As Claire followed the nurse toward the elevators, Maria sank back into a chair. Exhaustion washed over her, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally wearing off. She checked the time, nearly midnight. She needed to get home to Sophia, to assure her daughter that everything would be okay, even if she wasn't sure that was true. Maria gathered her things and headed for the hospital exit, stepping out into the cool night air. As she waited for her rideshare to arrive, she couldn't help thinking about how quickly life could change. How we never know which day might be our last, which words might be our final ones. She hoped, for Richard's sake, that his last words wouldn't be those angry ones about misplaced keys. Everyone deserved a better ending than that. 3 days passed with Richard suspended between life and death. The doctors had done everything medically possible. The blocked artery was cleared, medications regulated his heart rhythm, and machines supported his failing organs. Yet he remained unresponsive, his brain showing minimal activity on the tests they ran every 12 hours. Maria had gone back to work at her other cleaning jobs, but she found herself returning to the hospital each evening. She told herself it was to check on Claire, who barely left her brother's side, but the truth was more complicated. Somehow being present for Richard's struggle felt important, as if bearing witness to his fight gave it more meaning. Sophia had asked to visit too, which surprised Maria. After some hesitation, she'd agreed to bring her daughter to the hospital on the 4th day. Now they sat together in the ICU waiting room while Claire took her turn at Richard's bedside. "Are you sure you want to go in there?" Maria asked her daughter. "It might be scary to see him with all those machines." Sophia nodded, her eyes serious. "I need to see him, Mom. I keep thinking about how angry he was and then how he just fell. In my head, he's still lying there on the floor, not breathing." Maria understood. Sophia needed to replace that traumatic image with something else, even if that something else was a man in a hospital bed fighting for his life. The door to the waiting room opened, and Claire walked in. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her clothes rumpled from sleeping in hospital chairs. Despite this, she managed a small smile when she saw them. "Maria, Sophia, thank you for coming again." Claire knelt in front of Sophia. "Your mom says you'd like to see Richard?" Sophia nodded. "Is that okay?" "Of course it is. He'd appreciate having visitors, I think, even if he can't tell us right now." Claire looked up at Maria. "There's no change, but the nurse just finished caring for him, so it's a good time to visit." Maria took Sophia's hand as they walked down the corridor to Richard's room. She felt her daughter's grip tighten as they approached the door. "It's okay to be nervous," she whispered. "We don't have to stay long." They entered the room quietly. If anything, Richard looked worse than he had on that first day. His face was more swollen. His skin had taken on a yellowish tinge, and dark bruises marked his arms where IVs had been placed and replaced. The ventilator continued its rhythmic whooshing, breathing for him when he could not breathe for himself. Sophia stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes wide. "It's okay," Maria assured her. "All these machines are helping him." Sophia approached the bed slowly, studying Richard's face. "He looks so different," she whispered. "The medicines they're giving him cause some swelling," Claire explained gently from behind them. "And he's been through a lot." Sophia reached the side of the bed and stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke. "Hello, Mr. Thornton, it's Sophia, from your house." Her voice was barely audible over the beeping machines. Maria and Claire exchanged a glance, both moved by the girl's attempt to connect with the unconscious man. "I'm sorry about moving your keys," Sophia continued. "I was just trying to help. I didn't mean to make you mad." Maria put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Honey, you don't need to apologize. This isn't your fault." Sophia looked up at her mother. "But what if it is? What if getting so angry at me caused his heart attack?" Before Maria could respond, Claire stepped forward. "Sophia, listen to me," she said firmly but kindly. "My brother has had heart problems for years. The doctors told me he had significant blockage in his arteries that had been building up for a long time. This was going to happen whether he got angry or not. It was just a matter of when." "Really?" Sophia asked, uncertainty in her voice. Claire nodded. "Really? The doctor said he wasn't taking his medications properly and had missed his last 2 cardiology appointments. Richard. He wasn't very good at taking care of himself." Maria wasn't surprised to hear this. The medicine bottles she found while cleaning often had dates suggesting refills had been delayed or skipped entirely. Sophia seemed to process this information, then turned back to Richard. Very carefully, she placed her small hand on his. "I hope you get better, Mr. Thornton," she said. "Mrs. Patel's been watering your plants and Mom made sure your mail is being collected. So you don't need to worry about that stuff." A nurse appeared at the doorway. "I'm sorry, but I need to do some checks now. You can come back in about 15 minutes. They stepped out into the hallway. Sophia was quiet, thoughtful. "Are you okay?" Maria asked her. Sophia nodded slowly. "I think so. He doesn't look like himself, but at least he's not on the floor anymore." She looked up at Claire. "Do the doctors think he'll wake up?" Claire hesitated, clearly struggling with how to answer truthfully without frightening the child. They're not sure, she finally said. His heart was without oxygen for quite a while, but they're doing everything they can. As they walked back to the waiting area, a doctor approached them, the same cardiologist who had spoken to Maria on that first night. Miss Thornton, could I speak with you for a moment? Claire nodded. Of course. Maria, would you mind? We'll wait here, Maria assured her, steering Sophia toward the chairs in the corner of the room. They watched as the doctor led Claire a short distance away, speaking in low tones. Even from across the room, Maria could tell by Claire's posture, the sudden stiffening of her shoulders, the way her hand flew to her mouth, that the news wasn't good. When Claire returned to them, her eyes were filled with tears. The latest brain scan shows very little activity, she said, her voice breaking. They don't think he's going to wake up. And even if he did, he would likely have severe brain damage. Maria instinctively put an arm around Claire's shoulders. I'm so sorry. The doctor wants to talk about end-of-life decisions. Claire wiped at her eyes. I'm his medical power of attorney. I have to decide when to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia looked between the two women, understanding dawning on her young face. You mean they want to turn off the machines? She asked quietly. Claire nodded, unable to speak. But then he'll die, Sophia said, stating the harsh truth with a child's directness. He's already dying, honey. Maria explained gently. The machines are just slowing it down. They can't fix what's broken. Sophia considered this. Does it hurt him? Being on the machines? No, Claire assured her. They're giving him medicine so he doesn't feel any pain. That's good, Sophia said simply. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Finally, Claire spoke again. I need to make some phone calls. There are a few distant relatives who should know, and his boss. She trailed off, overwhelmed by the tasks ahead. Is there anything we can do to help? Maria asked. Claire looked at her gratefully. Actually, yes. Could you possibly go to Richard's house and get him some personal things? His favorite sweater, his watch, maybe some photos? I'd like to have them here, for when... Of course, Maria said. We can do that right now. Claire handed over her copy of Richard's house key. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done these past few days without you. 20 minutes later, Maria and Sophia stood in Richard's living room. The house felt different somehow, emptier as if already mourning the absence of its owner. What should we look for, Mom? Sophia asked. Claire said his favorite sweater. I think I know which one. The navy blue cashmere one he always wore on cold days. And his watch would be in his bedroom, probably on the dresser. As they moved through the house gathering items, Maria found herself noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The collection of vinyl records neatly organized on a shelf, the dog-eared paperbacks on his nightstand, the framed college diploma hanging in his office, small glimpses into who Richard was beyond the man who paid her to clean his house. In his bedroom, Sophia paused in front of a corkboard hanging beside the closet. Unlike the rest of the meticulously organized house, this board was a chaotic collection of ticket stubs, postcards, and photographs. Mom, look, Sophia said, pointing to one photo in particular. It showed a much younger Richard with his arm around a pretty woman with long blonde hair. Both were laughing, their faces full of joy. That must be his ex-wife, Maria said. Before the divorce. Sophia unpinned the photo carefully. Should we take this one to the hospital? Maria hesitated. I'm not sure if that would make Claire sad or happy. I think happy, Sophia decided. He looks really happy here, so maybe it's how he'd want to be remembered. They continued their search, finding Richard's watch in the bathroom and a small photo album in his desk drawer. The album contained mostly family photos, Richard and Claire as children, an older couple who must have been their parents, holiday gatherings from years past. As they were about to leave, Sophia stopped in the kitchen and opened a drawer. What are you looking for? Maria asked. His keys, Sophia replied. The ones that started everything. The keys were still there in the drawer where Sophia had put them, where Richard had found them just before his collapse. Maria watched as her daughter picked them up, turning them over in her palm. I still wish I hadn't moved them, Sophia said quietly. Maria knelt down to look her daughter in the eye. Sophia, listen to me. Claire was right. This was going to happen no matter what. If anything, you might have saved his life for these few extra days. If we hadn't been here when he collapsed, no one would have been here to call an ambulance. Sophia considered this, then carefully placed the keys on the entryway table, exactly where Richard had always kept them. Just in case he comes back, she said. Maria didn't have the heart to tell her that Richard wouldn't be coming back. Instead, she gathered the items they'd collected and led her daughter out the door, locking it behind them. As they drove back to the hospital, Maria thought about the strange turns life could take. 4 days ago, Richard had been a peripheral figure in their lives, just the man whose house she cleaned. Now they were among the few people keeping vigil as his life slipped away. People were connected in ways they didn't always recognize, threads weaving through each other's lives, forming patterns none of them could see until something pulled the threads tight. Sometimes it took a tragedy to reveal those connections. By the time they returned to the hospital, Claire had made her decision. She would allow the doctors to remove life support the following morning. "I need to do what Richard would have wanted," she told Maria. "He always said he wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines." Maria handed over the items they'd collected, the sweater, the watch, the photos. Claire clutched them to her chest like treasures. "Thank you," she whispered. "These mean more than you know." The day they removed Richard's life support was strangely peaceful. Outside the hospital window, golden autumn leaves drifted from the trees and sunlight streamed through the glass, casting warm patterns across the floor of his room. It seemed wrong somehow that such a beautiful day would be his last. Claire had asked Maria and Sophia to be there. "You were with him at the beginning of this," she'd said. "It feels right that you should be here at the end." So they stood quietly by the wall as the doctor explained the process. The ventilator would be turned off first. Then the medication supporting his blood pressure would be discontinued. After that, nature would take its course. "How long will it take?" Claire asked, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. "It varies," the doctor said gently. "Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. We'll make sure he remains comfortable throughout." Claire nodded, then turned to Maria and Sophia. "Are you sure you want to stay? This might be difficult to watch." Maria looked down at her daughter. "Sophia, you don't have to stay if you don't want to." Sophia shook her head firmly. "I want to stay. Mrs. Patel says it's important to say goodbye to people properly." The wisdom in her 12-year-old voice made Maria's heart ache. A nurse entered the room carrying Richard's personal belongings, the navy sweater, the watch, and the photos they'd brought from his house. Claire had asked that he be dressed in the sweater rather than the standard hospital gown. "Would you like a few moments alone with him before we begin?" the doctor asked. Claire shook her head. "No, I've said everything I needed to say. I just want him to be at peace now." The nurse moved around the bed, adjusting the IV that delivered pain medication and sedatives. Another nurse stood by the ventilator, waiting for the doctor's signal. "Whenever you're ready," the doctor said to Claire. She took a deep breath and nodded. The nurse pressed some buttons on the ventilator. The rhythmic whooshing that had filled the room for days gradually slowed, then stopped altogether. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's chest rose and fell once on its own, then again more shallowly. The monitor showing his heart rate beeped steadily, though the numbers were lower than before. Claire moved to the head of the bed and gently stroked her brother's hair. "It's okay, Richie," she whispered, using a nickname they hadn't heard before. "You can rest now." Maria put her arm around Sophia, who watched with solemn eyes. They stood together in silence as minutes ticked by. Each moment stretched into what felt like hours. Richard's breathing became more irregular. A deep gasp, followed by long pauses. Then another gasp. The nurse explained this was normal, part of the body's natural process of shutting down. The monitor showed his heart rate slowing. 70, 65, 60. Outside in the hallway, hospital life continued. A food cart rattled past. Someone laughed at the nurse's station. A phone rang in a distant room. Inside Richard's room, time seemed suspended as 4 people watched one life slip away. "Would you like to hold his hand?" the nurse asked Claire. Many patients can still sense touch even when they're unresponsive. Claire nodded and carefully took her brother's hand in hers. "His fingers are cold," she said softly. "That's normal," the nurse assured her. "Blood flow is concentrating in his vital organs now." Another 10 minutes passed. Richard's breaths came further and further apart. The monitor showed his heart rate dropping into the 40s. Claire looked across at Maria and Sophia. "Thank you for being here," she said. I know you didn't have to be, Maria nodded. We wanted to be. Sophia stepped forward suddenly. Can I tell him something before he's gone? Claire looked surprised but moved aside. Of course. Sophia approached the bed cautiously. She looked tiny next to all the medical equipment, her dark hair falling forward as she leaned close to Richard's ear. I forgive you for yelling at me, Mr. Thornton, she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. And I'm sorry about the keys. I hope wherever you're going is nice. A single tear slid down Claire's cheek as she heard these words. Maria felt her own eyes welling up. The monitor showed Richard's heart rate slowing further. 35. 25. His breathing was barely perceptible now, just the faintest rise and fall of his chest. It won't be much longer, the nurse said gently. Claire nodded, gripping her brother's hand more tightly. I'm here, Richie. I'm right here with you. Maria was struck by how intimate this moment was, the crossing from life to death. It was something most people never witnessed, yet here they were, strangers until a few days ago, now bound together by this profound experience. The monitor beeped one final time, then showed a flat line. The nurse pressed a button to silence the alarm. He's gone, she said softly. I'm so sorry for your loss. Claire bent forward and kissed her brother's forehead. Goodbye, Richie, she whispered. The doctor checked Richard's pulse, then noted the time in his chart. Time of death, 11:42 a.m., he said quietly. And just like that, Richard Thornton was gone, the angry man who had shouted over misplaced keys, the unconscious patient fighting for his life. The brother Claire had grown up with. All versions of him had vanished, leaving behind only an empty shell. The nurses tactfully suggested they might want to step out while they disconnected the remaining monitors and IVs. The three of them moved into the hallway, blinking in the bright hospital lights as if waking from a dream. Thank you again for staying, Claire said, her voice thick with tears. It meant a lot not to be alone, and what happens now? Sophia asked. Now I take care of the arrangements, Claire explained. There will be a funeral in a few days. Would you both come? I think Richard would want you there, Maria nodded. Of course we'll come. 3 days later, they gathered in a small chapel at Greenwood Cemetery. Richard's funeral was a modest affair, about 30 people in total. His colleagues from work, a few neighbors including Mrs. Patel, some distant relatives, and, sitting in the back row, Maria and Sophia. Claire had asked them to sit closer to the front with her, but Maria had declined, feeling it wasn't their place to take spots reserved for those who had truly known Richard. The service was brief but touching. Claire spoke about her brother's passion for music, his dry sense of humor, and the camping trips they'd taken as children. A colleague talked about Richard's dedication to his work and his attention to detail. No one mentioned his temper or his loneliness, the parts of him that had been evident to Maria during their limited interactions. After the service, a smaller group proceeded to the graveside for the burial. Standing under a large oak tree, they watched as Richard's casket was lowered into the ground. Claire tossed in a handful of dirt, then stepped back as tears streamed down her face. When it was over, people began to drift away in small groups, heading toward their cars. Maria and Sophia were about to do the same when Claire approached them, holding a small leather-bound book. I wanted you to have this, she said, offering the book to Maria. It's Richard's journal. I found it when I was going through his things. Maria shook her head. That should stay with you. It's personal. Claire pressed it into her hands. Please, there's something in here I think you should see. Reluctantly, Maria accepted the journal. Claire had marked a page with a slip of paper. Read it when you get home, Claire said, and thank you again for everything. Later that evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, Maria sat at her kitchen table and opened Richard's journal to the marked page. The handwriting was neat and compact, filling the lines with words written just days before his death. October 14th, the entry began. Another terrible day. Thomas tore apart my quarterly report in front of everyone. I shouldn't let it get to me, but I do. Dad's voice in my head again. Thornton men don't show weakness. So I swallowed it down like always, that familiar bitter pill. Dr. Levin wants me to take a stress leave. Says my blood pressure is dangerously high. I laughed it off, told him I'm fine. Another lie to add to the pile. Truth is, I haven't been fine for years. Not since Elaine left. I snapped at the barista this morning over a simple mistake with my order. Saw the hurt in her eyes. Didn't apologize. What's happening to me? I don't recognize myself anymore, this angry, impatient man I've become. Maria was cleaning today. Found the picture of Elaine and me at Lake Tahoe. The last time I remember being truly happy. Maria put it back exactly where it was. Careful not to disturb anything, like always. She's too good for me. Never complains when I leave dishes in the sink or clothes on the floor. I need to make changes. This anger is eating me alive. I'll start tomorrow. Take my medications properly, apologize to Thomas for overreacting, maybe even thank Maria for everything she does. Small steps toward being the man I used to be before bitterness took over. It's not too late to start over. At least I hope it isn't. Maria closed the journal, tears blurring her vision. Richard had wanted to change, to be better. He'd recognized what he was becoming and had planned to turn things around. But tomorrow never came for him. She thought of Sophia's words at the hospital. I forgive you for yelling at me. Such simple words, yet so powerful. Her daughter had offered forgiveness freely, even to someone who might not have deserved it. Life was too short for grudges, too fragile to waste on anger. If Richard's story had taught her anything, it was that. Maria carefully placed the journal on her bookshelf. She would keep it to remember, not just Richard, but the lesson his life and death had taught them. How a small thing like misplaced keys could seem so important one moment and so meaningless the next. How quickly everything could change. How we never know which day might be our last, which words might be our final ones. And how in the end forgiveness was perhaps the greatest gift we could offer. To others, and to ourselves.